The brass key still fit the lock, even after 19 years of salt spray and silence. Elias Vane turned the old mechanism and felt the familiar click give way beneath his fingers. The sound echoed through the empty entryway like a secret finally ready to be told. He pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The hallway smelled exactly as he remembered. Wood polish and sea salt. Old stone and colder memories. But underneath all that, something new lingered in the air. Lavender. Fresh bread. The kind of smells that meant someone actually lived here now. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Elias ran his hand along the wall as he walked deeper into the house. His fingers found the old groove instantly. A deep slash in the plaster where a sword had bit into the stone decades ago. He remembered watching that happen. He'd been 6 years old, hiding behind his mother's skirts while the men shouted and the steel flashed. His father had patched the wall the next week, but everyone knew the scar was still there underneath. Just like the scars on the families. Through the rain-streaked windows, Elias could see the cars pulling up the long gravel drive. Black sedans. Polish so fresh it reflected the grey Welsh sky. The Morrows had arrived. 3 generations of the family his own people had been fighting since before anyone could remember why. Tonight, they'd sign the treaty. Tonight, his family's name would be erased from the books forever. Unless he stopped it. Elias touched his jacket pocket, feeling the documents hidden there. Proof of his identity. Proof of his birthright. Proof that the Vane line wasn't extinct, no matter what the Morrows had been told. He'd travelled from Dublin to Holyhead, then driven 3 hours through the rain to be here. 19 years of waiting, and finally, the night had come. He walked toward the kitchen, needing a moment to collect himself before the signing began. The treaty ceremony started at 7. He had maybe 40 minutes to figure out exactly how he'd announce himself. That's when he saw it. Pinned to the old refrigerator with a chipped magnet shaped like a seashell. A child's drawing. Crayon on cheap paper, the kind you buy at the corner shop in town. 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. One figure had messy orange scribbles for hair. Red hair. The exact shade of his sister's hair. The sister who died 19 years ago. Elias's chest went tight. He stepped closer, his shoes silent on the worn kitchen tiles. The drawing was fresh. The paper hadn't yellowed. The crayon hadn't faded. This was new. This was days old at most. Who lived here? The question barely formed in his mind before the front door crashed open behind him. Elias spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward his pocket. But he stopped cold when he saw what burst through the doorway. A little girl. Maybe 5 or 6 years old. Hair the color of fire. Jam smeared across one cheek like war paint. She barreled straight into his legs, bounced off, and landed on the floor with a surprised oof. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Elias couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The girl scrambled to her feet, completely unafraid. In her hand, she clutched a wooden toy sword, painted silver and gold. She held it up like she might fight him, then seemed to change her mind. Instead, she spun around and shouted toward the kitchen doorway behind her. "Mum, the scary man from the picture is here." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. Picture. What picture? He looked past the girl, through the kitchen doorway, and felt the floor drop out from under him. A woman stood frozen in the threshold. Mid-30s. Dark hair pulled back. A tea towel in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, like she'd been preparing dinner when she heard the door. Her eyes were wide. Her face had gone pale. Elias knew those eyes. He'd grown up with those eyes. Carrie Thomas. His sister's best friend. The girl who used to sneak them both extra biscuits when his mother wasn't looking. The girl he'd left behind on the worst night of his life, 19 years ago, when everything fell apart. She looked exactly the same. And completely different. The knife clattered to the stone floor. Carrie didn't move to pick it up. She just stood there, one hand gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles went white. Her jaw trembled, but her eyes blazed with something Elias couldn't name. Fear. Anger. Both. The little girl ran to her mother and hid behind her legs, peeking out at Elias with open curiosity. No fear at all. Just the endless fascination of a child who'd found something new and interesting. "Mum," the girl whispered loudly, "is he the one?" Carrie didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes hadn't left Elias's face for a single second. Elias found his voice somewhere deep in his chest. It came out rough. Broken. Nothing like the confident man who'd walked through this door 5 minutes ago. Carrie. Just her name. That was all he could manage. She flinched like he'd struck her. Then, without a word, she reached for something on the hallway table. A framed photograph. Silver frame, slightly tarnished. She grabbed it and threw it at him with both hands. Elias caught it against his chest. The glass didn't break, but the impact knocked the air from his lungs. He looked down, and the world tilted sideways. It was a wedding photo. His sister, Ellen. Red hair piled high. White dress. Smiling so wide her eyes disappeared into happy crescents. Standing next to a man Elias didn't recognize. Dark hair. Kind eyes. A Maro crest pin on his lapel. This wasn't a photo from 19 years ago. This was new. His sister was alive. Ellen was alive. She'd been alive this whole time. Married. To a Maro. Living somewhere, laughing somewhere, raising children somewhere while Elias spent 19 years building his life around her grave. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime. 6:30. 30 minutes until the treaty signing. 30 minutes until his sister would walk into that room with her husband's family and sign away the Vane name forever. Elias looked up at Carrie. At the little girl hiding behind her legs. At the child's drawing on the fridge. The one with the red-haired stick figure holding hands under the sun. "That little girl," he whispered. "Is she?" Carrie's voice finally broke free. Low and fierce and shaking with 19 years of secrets. "She married a Maro, Elias. She's in the drawing room right now, pouring champagne for the men who want to bury your family's name. And that little girl is her daughter." The words landed like stones in still water. Elias looked at the photo in his hands. At his sister's smiling face. At the life she'd built without him. Carrie stepped forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any blade. "You came to destroy us tonight, but we buried you instead." The clock chimed on. 6:31. The drawing room waited. And somewhere beyond that door, a sister he'd mourned for 19 years was pouring champagne for the men who'd kept the secret. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6:30, and the sound seemed to shake the very stones beneath Elias's feet. He stood there, frozen in the kitchen doorway, the wedding photo still clutched against his chest. His hands had started sweating. He could feel the dampness seeping into the edges of the frame, and somehow that tiny detail snapped everything into focus. His sister was alive. His sister had been alive this whole time. 19 years of mourning. 19 years of building his life around revenge. And she'd been 40 minutes away the entire time, living, laughing, raising a child. The little girl peeked out from behind Carrie's legs again. Up close, Elias could see it now. The shape of her eyes. The way she tilted her head when she was curious. Ellen did that. Had always done that, even as a child. This little girl wasn't just any child. She was his niece. Blood of his blood. And she had no idea who he was. "Mum," the girl whispered, tugging at Carrie's sleeve. "Why is he crying?" Elias touched his face. He hadn't realized. His cheeks were wet. Carrie pulled the girl closer, protective instincts warring with 19 years of buried history. She looked different now than the girl he remembered. Older, obviously. Lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But the same fierce loyalty burned in her gaze. The same stubborn set to her jaw. She'd been protecting Ellen back then too. Standing between her and the worst of the fighting. Taking the blame for things that weren't her fault. Some things never changed. "Fionn," Carrie said quietly, her voice surprisingly steady, "go to your room for a bit, okay? I need to talk to this man alone." The little girl, Fionn, his niece's name was Fionn, shook her head firmly. No. He's scary. Elias almost laughed. Almost. The sound died in his throat before it could escape. He's not going to hurt anyone, Carrie said. She looked at Elias when she said it, and he understood. It wasn't a statement. It was a question. Are you? Elias nodded slowly. He wasn't sure what he was agreeing to, but he knew he meant it. Fionn considered this for a long moment, then sighed with the dramatic weight only a 6-year-old could manage. Fine. But I'm keeping my sword. She held up the wooden toy, gave Elias her best stern look, and marched out of the kitchen with all the dignity her small body could muster. They waited until her footsteps faded up the stairs. Then the silence crashed back down, heavier than before. Carrie moved first. She walked to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair, and sat down hard, like her legs had given out. She gestured to the chair across from her. Elias took it, still clutching the photograph. The kitchen looked different up close. Modern appliances mixed with the old stone walls. A vase of fresh flowers on the windowsill. Children's shoes lined up by the back door. This wasn't the cold, empty house he'd expected. This was a home. Someone's home. His sister's home. When did you find out? Elias asked. His voice cracked on the last word. Carrie stared at the table for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words came slow and careful, like she was choosing each one by hand. The night they took you away. Ellen ran to my house in the rain, barefoot, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. She told me everything. The plan to send you to Ireland. The fake reports they'd file. The way they'd tell everyone you died in the fighting. Elias's stomach turned. She knew. Before it happened. She knew they were coming for you. Your father made her promise not to tell. Said it was the only way to keep you safe. Keep her safe. Keep anyone safe. Carrie finally looked up, and her eyes held 19 years of guilt. She wanted to go with you. Did you know that? She packed a bag and everything. But your father locked her in her room until the boat sailed. The photograph trembled in Elias's hands. He looked at his sister's smiling face again, and suddenly he saw it differently. The smile was real. But behind her eyes, if he looked close enough, there was something else. Something that looked a lot like grief. She thought you'd come back, Carrie continued. We both did. We waited every day for months. Then years. Eventually, we stopped waiting. What else could we do? The clock ticked on. 6:45 now. 15 minutes until the treaty signing. She married a Morrow, Elias said. It wasn't a question anymore. Gareth Morrow. Carrie nodded toward the photo. That's him there. The kindest man you'll ever meet. He has no idea about any of this. The fighting, the secrets, the lies. His family kept him out of it. Protected him from the worst. When he met Ellen, it was like something finally made sense for both of them. And they just let her marry him? Your families have been trying to kill each other for generations. The Morrows didn't know who she was. She changed her name. Moved to Cardiff for a few years. Let the dust settle. Carrie leaned forward, her voice dropping. By the time anyone figured it out, she was already pregnant with Fionn. What were they going to do? Start the war again over a wedding? Elias thought about that. Thought about the bodies he'd seen as a child. The funerals. The blood in the streets. All of it, over nothing. And here, in this kitchen, two families had found a way past it without anyone even noticing. What about my father? Carrie's face hardened. Dead. 10 years ago. Heart attack. He never stopped looking over his shoulder, waiting for you to come back. Waiting for the day his lie would catch up with him. And my mother. 5 years after you left. Grief, the doctors said. But we all knew better. She just couldn't live with what they'd done. Elias set the photograph down carefully on the table. His hands were steady now, even though everything inside him was chaos. He thought about the documents in his pocket, the proof of his identity, the claim he'd planned to make, the way he'd intended to walk into that drawing room and announce himself to the world. None of it mattered anymore. The treaty wasn't the enemy. The Morrows weren't the enemy. The only enemy was a lie, and the lie had died years ago. "What do I do now?" he asked. Carrie reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm. Real. The first human touch he'd felt in longer than he could remember. "You go in there," she said quietly. "You see your sister. And you let her decide what happens next. She's waited 19 years to say goodbye to you. Don't make her wait any longer." The clock chimed 7. Somewhere in the drawing room, glasses were clinking. Voices were rising. The treaty was about to be signed. And Elias Vane, the hidden heir who'd come to burn it all down, sat in a warm kitchen holding his sister's photograph, trying to remember how to be a brother again. Fion's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Mum, is the scary man staying for dinner?" Carrie looked at Elias. Waited. Elias swallowed hard. "If that's okay," he said. "I'd like that." Fion's delighted shriek echoed through the house, and for the first time in 19 years, Elias smiled. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 7:15, and the sound carried through the old house like a warning. Elias hadn't moved from the kitchen table. He sat with his hands flat on the worn wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingertips, trying to anchor himself to something real. The photograph of his sister's wedding stood propped against the salt shaker now. Every time he looked at it, his chest did something strange. Something that felt a lot like hope and terror all twisted together. Carrie had gone to check on Fion upstairs. She'd been gone 10 minutes. Maybe longer. Elias had lost track of time somewhere between learning his sister was alive and realizing he had no idea who he was anymore. Through the walls, he could hear faint sounds from the drawing room. Laughter. The clink of glasses. Someone was playing the piano badly, stumbling through a song Elias remembered his mother used to hum. The treaty signing should have happened by now. Maybe it had. Maybe he'd already missed his chance to stop it. Maybe that was a good thing. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the documents he'd carried for 19 years. Birth certificate. Family tree. Letters from his father that he'd stolen before leaving. Proof of who he was, wrapped in aged paper and sealed in plastic to protect against the sea air. He'd built his whole life around these papers. Around the moment he'd finally get to use them. Now they felt like nothing. Dead weight in his hands. The kitchen door creaked open. Elias looked up, expecting Carrie. Instead, a small figure stood in the doorway, clutching a wooden sword and wearing yellow pajamas covered in little stars. Fion. She studied him for a long moment, her head tilted exactly the way Ellen used to tilt hers. Then, without a word, she marched to the table and climbed into the chair across from him. The sword she placed carefully in front of her, like a barrier between them. "You're still crying," she announced. Elias touched his face. She was right. He hadn't noticed. "I'm not scary," he said. It came out weaker than he intended. Fion considered this. "Mum says scary people don't know they're scary. So maybe you don't know." "That's very wise for someone your age." "I'm 6. That's practically grown up." She pointed at the documents on the table. "What's that?" Elias looked at the papers. How could he explain 19 years of pain to a child? How could he explain any of this? "It's a story," he said finally, "about someone who thought he knew who he was. But he was wrong." Fion nodded like this made perfect sense. "I have stories like that. Like when I thought I wanted a pony for my birthday, but then I met a pony and it was really big and I changed my mind." Something like that. Mum says it's okay to change your mind. It means you're learning. Elias felt something crack open in his chest. Not painfully. More like a door opening in a room that had been locked for years. He looked at this small girl in her star pajamas, and he saw his sister's face looking back at him. Saw his mother's stubborn chin. Saw generations of family he'd never known he still had. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Fionn nodded gravely. What do you know about your mum's brother? The one in the pictures. The girl's face lit up with recognition. Uncle Elias. He's a hero. Mum tells me stories about him every night before bed. How he was really brave and fought the bad guys and had to go away on a big boat. But he's coming back one day. Mum says so. Elias couldn't breathe. She says he's coming back. She lights a candle for him sometimes. On special days. We sing happy birthday to the candle because we don't know where he is to sing to him. Fionn frowned. But you have the same name as him. That's weird. Before Elias could respond, Carrie appeared in the doorway. Her face went pale when she saw them sitting together. Fionn, love, I told you to stay in your room. He was crying again. Mum. You can't leave crying people alone. It's rude. Carrie's expression softened. She crossed to the table and scooped Fionn onto her lap, holding her close. The little girl went willingly, still watching Elias with those curious eyes. The signing, Elias said. Did it happen? Carrie shook her head. Delayed. Gareth's father wanted to make a speech. He's been talking for 20 minutes about peace and forgiveness and new beginnings. The actual signing is in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. He had 10 minutes to decide. Elias stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars had come out over the Welsh coast. The same stars he'd watched from boats and trains and borrowed rooms for 19 years. The same stars his sister saw every night from this very house. I was going to destroy them, he said quietly. The Maros. The treaty. Everything. I spent my whole life planning it. Carrie didn't respond. She didn't need to. I thought they'd taken everything from me. My family. My name. My future. I thought if I could just take it back, I'd finally feel whole again. He pressed his palm against the cold glass. But Ellen's been here the whole time. She built a life. A family. She has a daughter who sings happy birthday to a candle because she misses me. Fionn's small voice piped up behind him. Mum, why is Uncle Elias's name the same as the scary man's name? The silence that followed stretched forever. Carrie's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Fionn, sweetheart. This is your Uncle Elias. He's the one from the stories. He's come home. More silence. Elias turned from the window. Fionn stared at him with enormous eyes. Her lower lip trembled. For a terrifying moment, he thought she might cry. Then her face broke into the biggest smile he'd ever seen. You're real. You're actually real. She scrambled off Carrie's lap and ran to him, stopping just short of crashing into his legs. Up close, she looked so much like Ellen it hurt. Mum said you'd come back someday. She said heroes always come back. I told everyone at school and they didn't believe me, but you're here. Before Elias could respond, she threw her arms around his legs and hugged him with all her 6-year-old strength. Elias looked down at the top of her head. At the red hair exactly like his sister's. At the small hands gripping his trousers like she'd never let go. And then Elias realized the war he had been fighting for 19 years was a lie. There was no enemy here. No battle to win. No revenge to claim. There was only this little girl who'd been taught to love a ghost. Only a sister who'd lit candles and sung birthday songs to empty air. Only a family that had never stopped waiting, even when waiting made no sense. He knelt down and hugged Fionn back. Properly. The way he'd hug his own child if he had one. The way he'd wished someone had hugged him, somewhere in the darkness of the last 19 years. I'm here, he whispered into her hair. I'm really here. Fionn pulled back just enough to look at his face. Are you staying? For real staying? Not just visiting. The clock struck 7:30. 7:30. Somewhere in the drawing room, a treaty waited to be signed. A family waited to make peace official. And Elias's sister waited, probably nervous, probably excited, probably having no idea that her brother was 30 feet away. Elias looked at Carrie over Fionn's head. She was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. But she was smiling too. The first real smile he'd seen from her. "I'm staying," Elias said. And meant it. Fionn whooped with joy and hugged him again. "I have to tell Mum. She's going to be so happy. She's in the big room with all the boring people, but I don't care, I'm telling her right now." She broke away and bolted for the door before either adult could stop her. "Fionn, wait." Carrie called out, but the girl was already gone, her small feet pattering down the hallway toward the drawing room. Elias stood up slowly. His legs felt unsteady. His heart pounded in a way it hadn't since he was a boy. "Elias." Carrie's voice pulled his attention. She was standing now, wringing her hands. "She's going to see you. Ellen. In about 30 seconds, Fionn is going to run into that room and announce that her uncle is in the kitchen, and Ellen is going to either faint or scream or both." Elias nodded. "I know. Are you ready for that?" He thought about it. Really thought about it. 19 years of anger and grief and planning. 19 years of building walls around his heart. And in the span of one evening, a little girl in star pajamas had knocked them all down. "No," he said honestly. "But I don't think ready matters anymore." From down the hall, they heard a child's voice shouting with joy. Then a woman's voice, confused, asking a question. Then silence. The kind of silence that happens right before everything changes. Elias walked out of the kitchen. Toward the drawing room. Toward his sister. Toward whatever came next. Carrie followed close behind. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered. Every step echoed off the old stone walls. Every breath felt too loud. He passed the spot where he'd hidden as a child during the fighting. Past the window where he'd watched his father argue with strangers. Past the door where his mother had kissed him goodnight for the last time, neither of them knowing it was goodbye. And then he was there. The drawing room door stood slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap. Voices murmured inside. He could hear Fionn's excited chatter, though not the words. Elias reached for the door handle. His hand trembled. Behind him, Carrie whispered, "You can do this." He pushed the door open. The room was full of people. Elderly men in suits. Women in expensive dresses. Morrow family members he'd been taught to hate since birth. They all turned to look at him, confused by the stranger in their midst. Elias didn't see any of them. He saw only one person. A woman with red hair, standing by the fireplace. A glass of champagne frozen halfway to her lips. A face he'd carried in his memory for 19 years. Older now, softer now, but unmistakably hers. His sister, Ellen. Their eyes met across the crowded room. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. The shattered glass sparkled on the hardwood floor like tiny diamonds catching the firelight. Elias stood in the doorway, frozen. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too full of eyes all fixed on him. He could feel them studying his clothes, his face, trying to place him. Stranger in a fine suit. Stranger with the wrong name and the wrong history and no business being here tonight. None of that mattered. Only Ellen mattered. She hadn't moved since the glass left her fingers. Her hands still hung in the air where the champagne flute used to be. Her face had gone pale, then flushed, then pale again. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Fionn stood at her mother's feet, tugging at her dress. "Mum, it's him. It's really him. I found him in the kitchen." The little girl's voice cut through the frozen silence like sunlight through clouds. Several people in the room exchanged confused glances. An elderly woman near the fireplace whispered something to the man beside her. A man with silver hair and a Morrow crest on his lapel stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to suspicion to something harder. "Who is this?" The silver-haired man's voice carried authority. Gareth's father, Elias guessed. The patriarch. The one who'd helped bury the truth for 19 years. Ellen still hadn't spoken. Elias took a step into the room. Then another. The crowd parted slightly, instinctively, like water around a stone. He kept his eyes on his sister, ignoring the whispers spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. "I'm sorry," he said. Just those 2 words. They weren't enough. They'd never be enough. But they were all he had. Ellen's hand finally lowered to her side. She pressed her palm against her dress, like she needed to feel something solid. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't blink, didn't look away, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she did. Gareth Morrow appeared at her side. A tall man with kind eyes and the same dark hair from the wedding photo. He put his arm around Ellen's waist, steadying her. His expression wasn't hostile, just confused, protective. The look of a man who loved his wife and didn't understand why a stranger was making her cry. "Ellen." His voice was gentle. "Love, who is this?" Before she could answer, the silver-haired man spoke again. Louder this time. "I asked a question. Who is this person? This is a private ceremony. Security should never have let him through the gates." Elias turned to face him. The Morrow patriarch. The man who'd helped his father bury the lie. The man who'd signed off on sending a child away so the families could pretend the fighting was over. "My name is Elias Vane," he said quietly, "and I'm here to see my sister." The room went absolutely still. Someone gasped. A glass clinked as it was set down too hard on a side table. The elderly woman near the fireplace pressed her hand to her chest like she'd been struck. Gareth's father took a step back. Just one. But everyone saw it. "That's not possible," he said. But his voice had lost its authority. Now it just sounded old. Scared. "The Vane line is extinct. The boy died years ago. Everyone knows this." Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out the documents. Not as weapons anymore. Just as proof. As truth. He held them up so everyone could see. Birth certificate. Family photographs. Letters from my father, your old friend, explaining exactly why he sent me away. He looked around the room, meeting eyes. "I've been in Ireland for 19 years. Dublin, mostly. Working in a bookshop near the river. Living above a pub owned by a woman who took me in when I had nothing. I came back tonight because I thought I needed to fight. But I was wrong." Gareth's father shook his head. "This is some kind of trick. Some scheme to disrupt the treaty. I won't allow it." "Then look at her." Elias pointed at Ellen. "Look at my sister's face. And tell me this is a trick." Everyone looked. Ellen had tears streaming down her cheeks now, silent and steady. But she was smiling. The biggest, brightest smile Elias had ever seen. She pulled away from Gareth's arm and took a step forward. Then another. Then she was walking, then nearly running, closing the distance between them like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. She stopped inches from him, reached up and touched his face with both hands. Her fingers were warm and trembling. "You're real," she whispered. "You're actually real." "I'm real," Elias said. His voice cracked on the words. "I'm here. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry for everything." Ellen laughed through her tears. Actually laughed. The sound filled the room like music. "You're apologizing?" "You." "Elias, I'm the one who should apologize. I let them send you away. I didn't fight hard enough. I didn't." "Stop." Elias put his hands over hers, holding them against his cheeks. "Stop. We are not doing that. No apologies. Not tonight. Not ever." Behind them, Fionn had climbed onto a chair to see better. "Mum, why is everyone crying? Is this a happy cry or a sad cry?" Ellen pulled back just enough to look at her daughter. "Happy cry, baby. The happiest cry there is." Gareth had moved closer, his expression shifting from confusion to wonder. "Ellen, this is really him? The brother you talk about? The one you light the candles for?" She nodded, unable to speak. Gareth looked at Elias for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He stuck out his hand. "I'm Gareth, your sister's husband. I've heard stories about you my whole life. It's an honor to meet you." Elias stared at the offered hand. This man was a Morrow, born into the family he'd been taught to hate. And here he was, offering welcome instead of resistance, offering family instead of war. He took the hand, shook it firmly, felt the warmth of genuine acceptance flowing through the simple gesture. "Thank you," Elias said, "for taking care of her, for making her happy." "She makes me happy," Gareth said simply, "every single day." The silver-haired man, Gareth's father, hadn't moved. His face had gone through several colors, settling finally on a pale, defeated grey. He looked at Elias with something like wonder, or fear, or both. "The treaty," he said quietly. "If you're really a Vane, if you really have a claim, this changes everything. The land, the titles, the agreements we spent years negotiating." Elias turned to face him fully. For a moment, the old anger flickered. The desire to punish, to make someone pay for the years he'd lost. Then he felt small fingers slip into his hand. He looked down. Fionn had climbed off a chair and come to stand beside him, her tiny hand wrapped around two of his fingers. "Are you going to be mad at Grandad?" she asked. He looked scared. "You shouldn't be mad at scared people." Elias looked at the old man, saw him differently now, not as an enemy, just as someone who'd made terrible choices, probably believing they were right. Someone who'd carried secrets for 19 years, probably losing sleep over them. Someone who was scared because everything he'd built was suddenly uncertain. "I'm not here to take anything," Elias said. "I'm not here to fight. I came here thinking I needed to destroy the treaty. But I don't. I just needed to find my family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key, the brass key to the front door. He held it up so everyone could see. "I used this key to get into the house tonight. 19 years, and it still worked. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. That's my sister, keeping a place for me even when she didn't know if I'd ever come back." Ellen was crying again. So was Carrie, who'd slipped into the room at some point and stood near the door. Even Gareth's mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Gareth's father cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer. Older. "The treaty," he said again, but this time it wasn't a question. "It's almost time to sign. If you're truly Elias Vane, if you're truly here and you have no objection, would you do us the honor of witnessing it?" The room held its breath. Elias looked at Ellen. She nodded, hope shining in her eyes. He looked at Gareth, who smiled encouragingly. He looked at Fionn, who was now trying to climb onto his leg like a small monkey. Then he looked at the treaty, lying on the antique desk near the fireplace. Pages and pages of words that would end generations of fighting. Words that would let families heal. Words that would let children like Fionn grow up without the fear he'd known. "Yes," Elias said. "I'd be honored." The tension in the room dissolved like morning fog. People began to move again, to breathe again. Someone produced a fresh glass of champagne and pressed it into Elias's hand. Someone else guided him toward the desk. Fionn, still clinging to his leg, went along for the ride. Ellen appeared at his other side, her arm linked through his. "I can't believe you're here," she whispered. "I can't believe any of this is real." "Believe it," Elias said. "I'm not going anywhere." Gareth's father picked up the treaty. He looked at Elias one more time, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded, just slightly, and held out the pen. "Shall we?" Ellen signed first, her name flowing across the page in familiar handwriting Elias remembered from childhood letters. Gareth signed next, his hand steady. One by one, the family elders added their names, representing generations of history finally laid to rest. Then it was Elias's turn. He held the pen for a long moment, thought about the boy who'd left this house 19 years ago, terrified and alone. Thought about the man who'd come back, angry and ready to fight. Thought about who he was now, standing in this room surrounded by people who should have been enemies but somehow felt like family. He signed his name. Elias Vane. Right below his sisters. The room erupted in applause. Someone actually cheered. Fionn, still attached to his leg, shouted "Yay!" at the top of her lungs. Ellen threw her arms around him, hugging so tight he could barely breathe. Gareth clapped him on the shoulder. Even the silver-haired patriarch managed something that almost looked like a smile. And in the middle of all that joy, all that noise, all that impossible happiness, Elias looked across the room and saw the key still in his hand. The brass key to the front door. The key that had started everything. He closed his fingers around it. And for the first time in 19 years, he felt like he was home. The sun hung low over the Irish Sea, painting the water in shades of golden pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Elias sat on the cliff edge, his legs dangling over the side, the jagged rocks far below catching the last light of day. The wind tugged at his hair and carried the smell of salt and seaweed and something green and growing from the fields behind him. 24 hours ago, he'd stood in this same spot, watching the same sunset, but everything had been different then. 24 hours ago, he'd been a ghost. Now he was just a man. Tired. Hopeful. Unsure what came next, but strangely okay with not knowing. In his hand, he held the child's drawing from the refrigerator. The crayon colors had softened in the evening light. The two stick figures holding hands under the yellow sun. The messy orange scribbles that meant red hair. He'd stared at this drawing 100 times since last night, and every time he saw something new. This morning, he'd noticed the figures had smiles. Big, wide, crayon smiles that took up half their faces. This afternoon, he'd realized one figure was taller than the other. Adult and child. Mother and daughter. Or maybe uncle and niece. The drawing didn't specify. Now, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, he understood something else entirely. He'd thought the red-haired figure in the drawing was him. The scary man from the picture. The stranger who'd appeared in the kitchen and made everyone cry. But that wasn't right. That wasn't what this drawing was about at all. The red-haired figure was Ellen. His sister. Fionn's mother. The person who'd lit candles and sang birthday songs to empty air for 19 years. The person who'd kept his memory alive, even when keeping it alive meant carrying grief like a stone in her chest. Fionn had drawn her mother. Holding hands with herself. Under a sun that never set. Because that's what children do. They draw the world as it should be, not as it is. They draw safety and love and endless summer afternoons. They draw the people who matter most, holding on tight, never letting go. Elias had spent 19 years thinking he'd been forgotten. Erased. Wiped from history like he'd never existed. But he'd been wrong. He was never forgotten. He was a story. A bedtime story told to a little girl who'd never met him, who knew him only through her mother's memories. A story about a brave uncle who had to go away on a big boat but would come back someday. A story that came with a candle and a birthday song and the absolute certainty that heroes always returned. Fionn had believed that. Even when no one else did. Even when Elias himself had stopped believing in anything at all. Grass rustled behind him. Soft footsteps. Small ones. Elias didn't turn around. Just held up the drawing, letting it catch the last light. A tiny hand reached over his shoulder and took it. Fionn settled onto the grass beside him, her small shoulder pressing against his arm. She'd changed out of her star pajamas into a blue dress with yellow flowers. Her red hair was braided neatly, probably by Carrie. In her other hand, she clutched the wooden sword, because some things were too important to leave behind. She studied the drawing seriously, then looked at him. "This is mine." "I know. I was just borrowing it." "For how long?" Elias considered the question. "About a day. Maybe a little more." Fionn nodded, accepting this. She looked at the drawing again, then at the sunset, then back at the drawing. "The sun in my picture looks like that sun." She pointed at the horizon. "Same colors." You're right. It does. I didn't know sunsets were real. I just made up the colors because they're pretty. Elias smiled. The first easy smile he'd felt in years. That's the best reason to do anything. Because something's pretty. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky shift from gold to orange to deep, softening pink. Behind them, the old manor house stood with its lights coming on one by one. The chipped blue door was propped open, letting the evening breeze flow through. Through the kitchen window, Elias could see movement. Carrie, probably, making dinner. Ellen, maybe, setting the table. Gareth had invited him to stay. For dinner. For the night. For as long as he wanted. The guest room was ready, fresh sheets and a soft pillow and a window that faced the sea. Elias hadn't answered yet. He wasn't sure he knew how. Mum says you might leave again. Fion's voice was small but steady. She says grown-ups have things to do and places to be. But I think she's worried. Elias looked at her. Really looked. At the seriousness in her young face. At the way she held her sword like a shield. At the trust in her eyes, waiting for his answer. I'm not leaving, he said. Not this time. Promise. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Promises were complicated things. Elias knew that better than most. He'd spent 19 years living with broken promises, with words that meant nothing, with people who said one thing and did another. But this was different. This was a little girl in a blue dress, asking for something simple and true. I promise, he said. Fion considered this. Then she held out her sword. You should have this. For protection. Since you're staying. Elias looked at the wooden sword. Painted silver and gold. Chipped along one edge from enthusiastic play. Worn smooth where small hands had gripped it tight. I can't take your sword. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. That's different. She pushed it into his hands. Mum says heroes need swords. And you're a hero. So you need one. Elias wrapped his fingers around the worn wooden handle. It felt surprisingly solid. Surprisingly right. Thank you, he said. I'll take good care of it. You better. I might need it back someday. If there's dragons. I'll keep it safe from dragons. Fion nodded, satisfied. She leaned against his arm again, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. The sky deepened to purple, then to the soft blue of early evening. Stars began to appear, faint at first, then brighter. Mum's making shepherd's pie for dinner, Fion said. It's my favorite. She makes it when she's happy. Is she happy tonight? Really happy. She kept crying earlier, but she said they were happy tears, so it's okay. Fion paused. Grown-ups cry a lot. Is that normal? Elias laughed softly. More normal than you'd think. That's weird. It is. Very weird. From the house, a voice called out. Ellen's voice, warm and carrying on the evening air. Fion. Elias. Dinner's ready. Fion jumped up immediately, grabbing Elias's hand. Come on. You have to try Mum's shepherd's pie. It's the best in the whole world. Elias let himself be pulled to his feet. The drawing was still in his other hand, carefully held so it wouldn't crumple. He looked at it one more time in the fading light. The two stick figures. The yellow sun. The simple, perfect truth of a child's vision. He tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket, next to his heart. They walked toward the house together, Fion chattering about school and friends and the kitten she wanted for her birthday. The chipped blue door grew closer with every step. Warm light spilled out onto the grass. The smell of shepherd's pie and something sweet baking drifted through the air. At the doorway, Elias paused. Ellen stood in the kitchen, arranging plates on the table. Carrie was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Gareth sat at the table with papers spread out, some kind of work he'd brought home. The scene was so ordinary, so normal, so completely domestic that it almost hurt to look at. This was what he'd missed. Not battles or revenge or proving himself right. Just this. Just evenings with people who loved each other. Just dinner and conversation and the small, precious moments that made a life. Ellen looked up and caught him watching. She smiled. That same smile from the wedding photo, but real now. Alive. Here. You coming in? She asked. Or are you going to stand in the doorway all night? Elias stepped inside. The warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. Fionn had already climbed into her chair and was demanding bread. Gareth looked up from his papers and waved. Carrie slid a glass of water across the table toward an empty seat. His seat. Elias sat down. The chair was solid beneath him. The table was worn wood, scarred from years of meals and conversations and life. The people around him were family, even the ones who shared no blood. Fionn reached for the bread and knocked over her water. Everyone laughed. Carrie grabbed a towel. Ellen scolded gently. Gareth rescued the papers. Fionn looked sheepish for approximately 2 seconds before launching into a detailed story about something that happened at school. Elias watched it all. The chaos. The love. The ordinary, beautiful mess of a family being a family. He reached into his pocket and touched the drawing. The scar was still there. Would always be there. 19 years couldn't be erased. But scars weren't just reminders of pain. They were proof of healing. Proof that something had been broken and had somehow, impossibly, become whole again. Fionn's voice broke through his thoughts. Uncle Elias, you're not eating. Mum's feelings will be hurt. Elias picked up his fork, looked around the table at the people who'd become his world in less than 24 hours. Wouldn't want that, he said, and took a bite. The shepherd's pie was perfect. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the way Ellen's eyes crinkled when she smiled. The way Carrie kept glancing at him like she still couldn't believe he was real. The way Gareth included him in conversations like he'd always been there. The way Fionn kicked her feet under the table and sang quietly to herself between bites. What mattered was that he was home. The chipped blue door stayed open all evening, letting in the night air and the sound of the sea. And somewhere in Elias's pocket, a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures held hands under a sun that would rise again tomorrow.